What separates a contender from a champion? Well, short answer is how they define and their perspective when it comes to adversity, when it comes to challenges. It's a mindset shift. But this, honestly, hands down, is going to really change your life, especially your own thinking, especially your own mindset, especially with getting over, right, some challenges when life throws you some storms, right? Or maybe potentially breaking some self-limiting beliefs that's holding you back. So I had a conversation with my buddy, just kind of talking about this when life throws you curveballs, because it's the inevitable. It will, right? That could be stress at home. That could be stress at work. That could be just financial stress. That could be injuries or illnesses. It could be anything, right? It could be something's going on at home with the family, with the kids, whatever the case may be, right? There's always going to be stress. There's always going to be adversity. And so to kind of help him in his situation, I kind of shared with him, the difference between a champion versus a contender. And I think that this analogy is really going to help you out, especially when life throws you some hardships as well, to kind of just, one, give you some boost of inspiration, maybe some motivation to continue, chucking along and making sure that, hey, you are striving to become the best version of yourself, that despite the current situations, right, when life's testing you and throwing you curveballs, you're keeping your eyes to the prize. Right? You understand that, hey, you're going to get through these tough times. They always say tough times don't last, but tough people do. So this is what I want you to think about. I'll tell you a little bit about myself, right? So back when I was 16 years old, I first started training in mixed martial arts. And in the state of Ohio, you can legally fight at the age of 18. So from 18 to 21 years old, I had, I think, 14 or maybe 15 amateur MMA fights, a handful of different Muay Thai kickboxing events, handful of different, boxing matches, jiu-jitsu tournaments. The list goes on, right? And the reason why I'm telling you that is because nobody just shows up and one day that they're a champion. It doesn't work like that, And so I want you to think about it in terms of, let's just use boxing, for example, okay? When somebody first shows up, right, they have to go through the basics, which means that they're not even hitting anything. They're learning how to throw a punch, right? Which means that typically when somebody shows up for boxing, they're very tense, right? They're keeping their arms all the way up here for their, blocking themselves. Typically they're pulling back their head because they don't want to get hit, and they're kind of sticking out their arms like this. They don't look very fluent at all, is what I'm trying to say. Is like they look like a beginner. You can tell. They don't have good foot movement, right? Which means that they're kind of stuck on their, heavy on their heels, so to speak, right? They're not loose. They're not bouncing around. They don't have a good flow, right, when it comes to throwing punches. They have to go through the basics. And typically after a few sessions, right, they're not somebody that's like this anymore. Now it's like, hey, they got a little bit more flow, right? And now also most beginners, right, they're holding in their punches, right? They're like, or holding in their breath when they throw their punches. So they're like, trying to throw their punches like this, right? And they're just gassing themselves out. And as an expert, right, hey, you got to have flow, right? You got to make sure you're breathing, right, at every single punch. And so as they're progressing, right, they're learning that. They're getting more comfortable in their own body, right? They're going through that process of training where they're not a beginner anymore. They're not, somebody that's all stiff like that. And then guess what? Right? Maybe they're on the mitts next, right? So somebody has the focus mitts, and at first, right, they're maybe doing good hitting the bag, and then somebody brings out the focus mitts, a little bit different, right? Because now you have to remember the combinations. Also, those focus mitts, depending on who's holding the pads, could throw punches back at you. So now it's like you're mixing in your punches, but also maybe some blocks and some bob and weaves and whatnot, right? So it's like hard for them in the beginning, but as soon enough, right, the more and more they practice, they get the flow of it. Now, here's where life takes a big turn of events, right? It's like, let's say that person continues on training, and let's say at that gym, they decide to step in the boxing ring and spar. So maybe like they're safe, they got the headgear, they got the mouthpiece in, everything like this. But now, especially if you're somebody that's ever boxed before or, fought, you know what I'm about to say, right? Is that they could look amazing on the mitts. They could look amazing on hitting the heavy bag. But when you actually step in the ring and sparring with somebody, technique goes out the door, right? Until you get comfortable with it. This is where you go back to being all stiff and holding in your punches, and you feel like you just got done doing a triathlon after just one round, right? You're huffing and puffing, gasping for air, right? But sure enough, right? You eventually get better and better the more that you do it. The more that you do it. And then, hey, who knows? Maybe next thing you know, it's like you spar all these rounds, all these different people within inside of your gym. And maybe you go to a different gym now and you do throw a little like a smoke or an exhibition match, right? Or maybe, who knows, you sign up for actually a real boxing match where you're fighting somebody that you don't know anything about, right? Now there's people watching you. There's the lights on you. Now it's very nerve-wracking, and eventually, that first fight comes along, it goes right back to you becoming a beginner, and now it's just like you're stiff, you're holding the punches, right? You're nervous, all that stuff. But the more and more that you do it, guess what? You get more comfortable. The easier it gets. This is why I love, a quote coming from a Navy SEAL that says, when you're faced with life's adversity, you don't rise to the level of the occasion. You actually sink to your level of training. So that's why you want to make sure that you're always training efficiently, And so how does this boxing analogy work when it comes to life? Life throwing you hardships, life throwing you curveballs. Well, think about it like this. Somebody could have showed up right in the very beginning stages of, let's say, learning how to box, and they're all stiff, and they immediately just say, hey, this isn't for me. I'm not getting this down. It's been a week or maybe 2 weeks. Like, I should have this down by now. I'm just going to quit. So they didn't. So they became a champion because they continued to, push through. They continued to train more. And then next thing you know, hey, they're on the focus pads. Remember, in the beginning stages, right, that's difficult at first. But once again, they're a champion because they didn't give up. They didn't throw in the white towel. And then they go ahead and start sparring. One of these things where, hey, once again, it's something brand new, right? And once again, it's hard in the beginning. But they continue to show up. And then next thing you know, they're boxing, right? And then you go through all those reps, right? The reps of the trial and errors. The reps of getting your butt kicked in the training. The reps of getting your butt kicked in the sparring. The reps of getting your butt kicked in the ring, right? Fighting all these opponents. But guess what? The champion is one that despite the adversity, despite the hardships, despite the storms, they continue to show up. They continue to try, right? They continue to practice. They continue to beat on their craft until they get better. That, my friends, is what separates a champion from a contender. So when life throws you, curveballs and hardships and storms, how do you face those storms? Do you face it as like, oh man, I'm just going to throw in the white towel and quit because I'm not good at this, or it's hard, or whatever the case may be? Or are you going to say, I'm not going to let this hardship define me? I'm not going to let this storm of life and all this stress beat me down and make me quit and throw in the white towel. No, I'm going to get through this. So it's like you need to remind yourself that you are a champion. You are a winner. As long as you don't quit, as long as you don't give up. This is why we always say at Heartletics, 1% better each and every day. Consistency is key. You just have to show up each and every day and make a promise, make a commitment to yourself that you're not going to give up, no matter how hard it gets. Because always remember, tough times don't last, but tough people do. Until next time, guys. Peace out, Girl Scouts.